hopefully we'll be better at it for today. So our goal for today is to get our feet wet doing a really common process. And that process is we're going to record ourselves doing something, and then we're going to go take a close look at the code and modify the code. So it turns out that like recording a macro and then playing it back is pretty simple. And you can do that without even ever looking at the VBA code that it generates. Unfortunately, many of the things that you want to do don't quite record exactly how you'd like them to. And there are some things that you simply can't record yourself doing. For example, if you say, listen, I'd like to make this macro do something over and over and over and over and over again, you can't record that part that tells it to kind of repeat it. And so you have to go in and jump in and do the code. And so our goal for today is to be able to record ourselves doing a fairly complex task, and then get into the code that gets generated and modify it, understand it, and work with it. Now, so over here on our blog for today, we've got a link right here to the legacy web query add-in. This is going to be especially for Mac users. Microsoft just never made the web query add-in available for Macs. And so I wrote an add-in that would at least get you to be able to generate a web query. The web query engine is on the Mac just fine, but the wizard to generate a web query was just never implemented on the Mac version. So this is so if you're doing this on Mac, go ahead and just follow this link. This should download. It should download in fact, let me go ahead and I'm going to see if I can switch over. I'm going to stop sharing this screen. If I can figure out what I'm doing, I'm recording the screen. I want to put this. Here we go. Here is my Mac. I'm already connected up. Okay. So I'm here then on my Mac and recording editing macros. I'm going to go ahead and download this add-in. And now I just have to remember how to add the add-in in an Excel. So I'm going to open up Excel. So if you're on the PC, just kind of sit back. We're going to get the Mac users up to a certain point, and then the PC users are going to catch up to them, and then we'll move along together. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Excel. For some reason, I'm only able to. I can't save on this, but that should be okay. Tools. Is this where you do it? Excel add-ins. Yeah, okay. So once you've downloaded, so Mac users, once you've downloaded that add-in, get Excel open, and you'll choose Tools, Add-ins, Excel add-ins down here at the bottom. And then you're going to go find that add-in. So you'll click Browse and go find that file that you downloaded. And I'm not sure where I put it. Legacy web query right here. You'll click on that, you'll choose Open, and then you should have the legacy web query add-in showing right here. Did that work for anyone on Mac? Just raise your hand if that worked for you. It looks like it's good, okay. Now, we'll say okay there, and then that add-in is going to be on the Data tab. So you come to your Data tab, and then right over here, you've got this little thing called Legacy Web Query. Click on that, and it should just give you a place where you can drop a URL in, and this add-in will build a web query using that URL. The URL that's there is the URL that I want. I mean, I wrote this add-in for this example that we're doing, so you don't have to even change the URL. It's the URL that we're after. We'll say OK. And that will generate a web query. Tell me, how many of you are already familiar with the idea of a web query? Or actually, I should say, before doing the homework for this class? Just a few of you. So it's one of the really powerful things, and it's been around in Excel for, man, 20 years, maybe longer. The idea is that you've got like a web page that has data that updates from time to time. And you'd like to be able to just pull in the current data that's shown on that web page into Excel. And so the web query will do that. And so there's a new version of the web query. We're using the legacy version of the web query. And the reason we're using the legacy version, even if it's a little bit harder to get to and it's not quite as slick, is because it writes really simple VBA. And our example today isn't so much about using the web query as it is about recording a process, looking at the code, and moving on. So after a couple more weeks of this stuff, we'll be able to dive into the regular web query wizard, even though it doesn't write such great code, and you'll still be able to get by. But we're trying to simplify things in class for today. So the idea is that the data that we have here was not just imported from the sheet, but the data that's here is actually, it's a query. So I'm going to come down to kind of the bottom around here, like line 900 or so. And this page that we brought in is just from random.org. It's a website that generates random numbers in various distributions. It will generate passwords for you and so forth, but it's just a pretty simple website, but something that data changes every time you refresh it. So as you watch here on like rows 93, 94, 95, on the data tab, I'm going to come here and click refresh all. And that should send another request to that web server, get the data that's there on the page, and then update it. So we can see those numbers updating as that page comes back. And so that's what we're after. I want to show one more thing here, Mac users, because we're not going to be able to record ourselves editing this web query either, because the tool to manipulate the query just isn't here. So if we go and look at our Visual Basic editor, I'm going to come to my developer tab, come to Visual Basic. And so what we'll see is that I've made this add-in to write some code into the immediate window. So I'm going to have you refer to this code kind of later in the example today. So if you're not seeing that immediate window, you're going to choose View, and then you should be able to choose Immediate Window to be able to get that to display. So you're going to you will end up copying and pasting this, and we're going to record that together on the PC side. Any questions for anyone who might be using Mac here today? All right, let's go ahead and do that again then on the stop share here. On the Mac side, the PC side. Okay, so I'm going to share this screen, share screen 2. Okay, so I'm on a blank workbook on my PC. And I need to start off by getting myself that web query. And so I'm going to come up here and just type in the little help bar. I'm going to type in here web. And I'm looking for something that says legacy web query. Web. Looks like they're making it even harder to find. Let's try legacy. Oh. Let's try from web. Maybe that the newest version here. Okay, data from web actions. Yeah, we may all be using that other add-in today. Are any of you able to get to the legacy web query wizard by doing the search up here? You all are, everyone but me. Just search legacy, it came up. Okay, so maybe I'm editing. I might have been editing a cell. Let's try it again. There we go. From web legacy. I think I was editing the cell, and so it was giving me fewer options. All right. I'm going to go ahead and click that. And what's going to happen is Excel is going to open up a little web browser. Like there's a web browser built into Excel. If all of your other web browsers break, you can come to Excel and you can still get to them. It's not a very good web browser. In fact, like it was written, I don't know, early 2000s. And for whatever reason, they haven't updated it. They've gone a kind of a different direction with the way they're bringing their data in from online sources. And so it's pretty bad at doing dynamic content. So I'm going to tell you something about the way the web works, and then I want to see how many of you already knew what I'm going to say. I'm just not quite sure how broadly this is known. In the early days of the web, the way it worked is you asked a web server for a web page, and it sent you some HTML, and your browser just showed the HTML. And then starting in the late 90s, they said, you know what? We're going to make it so the browser could actually change the HTML after that web server sent the file to the page. Like it could do dynamic HTML is what they used to call it. Today, we call it like JavaScript. And so the idea here now is that you'll get some file from the web server, and that file may say, browser, generate the web page according to this algorithm. It then runs some code and then shows the page. So there's kind of two different things that are happening here. You get the page from the server, and maybe you just show it. Or maybe once that page comes, it has instructions about how to show the page. How many of you knew that there was like a fundamental difference about how those web pages are shown already? You said, yeah, I totally knew that. Oh, okay, so that's good for me to take a minute to go over that. So this web query wizard was built in the time when almost every web page was just download the page and show it. And so it doesn't do very well with processing dynamic content. And that's okay, because it's just a problem with the web query. It's just a problem with the wizard, not a problem with the web query engine itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, it's got this script error. I'm going to say, hey, do you want to keep running scripts on this page? No. And it's going to keep running them anyway, apparently. I'll keep saying no as many times as I can. And then I've just got to get the URL that I want in here. Well, that's on our class page. So link for the web query wizard, that's the one I want. It's the same URL that we used on the Mac. And I'm going to paste that in here to the address and click on go. And that should go, allow all, what is this? Cookies, allow all, whatever. Okay, so this is just, I'm using this site because it's a site that has dynamic content on it and it's really simple. So the web query wizard doesn't really freak out about it. Okay, any questions getting to this point? Anyone say, I'm not quite there, I need a hand, or just give me a second more before you go on? Who's saying, I am there, ready to go? Okay, looks like most of us. Okay, so now, as it turns out, this thing is designed so you could come in here and say, you know what, I only want a part of this page. Like you could select just a part of that page, but just forget about that. We're just going to bring in the whole page. So by not clicking on any of those and saying import, it's going to say, great, where do you want to put this page? And I don't really want to put it down here in D24. Let's go ahead and put it here in A1. And so this should get us to the same place that our Mac users are as well. We've got the web query right here. If I scroll down, we should see, oh, it might be a little bit different data, but we should still see that random block of data there. And on the data tab, if we choose refresh all, we should see those numbers change as it makes another request to the web server. Okay, so now that we have the web query in place, we're ready to start thinking about what will it take for us to now record ourselves modifying the web query. The idea here is, in fact, where I'm headed is I'd like to be able to take an arbitrary set of stock tickers and go pull some information off of finance.yahoo.com. So can you imagine that you are headed off to you got an internship and you show up your internship and your advisor, your whoever your supervisor is says, all right, this is your job. Here on this internship is to go to this web page, go to this set of 4 or 5 web pages, and just kind of copy this data off of this website for every day we got to go kind of get the new data that our competitor pricing or something is going on. Would we really still have humans doing that in the year 2023? Yeah, why are you nodding your head so vigorously? Kind of regularly? That was like a normal thing, or? Fortunately, it wasn't every day. I had one, after I'd taught this class, I had a student come back after his internship, and he told me a story that at first I found unbelievable. Like I thought I really shouldn't believe him. He went to work for an internship at Amazon. And of all the places that you would think like totally are able to like automate sending programs to collect information from other online sources. Amazon, if they're not the best in the world at it, they are in the top 3 at doing that. And he said, I got this internship at Amazon, and I wanted to come back and tell you, Professor Allen, because that stuff you taught us right at the very beginning of class, that's what I did in my internship. And I was skeptical. It turns out he was hired by the digital camera division. Who's like familiar with high-end digital cameras? Anyone? We have any like photographers here that are really into this stuff? Yeah, you are. Okay, so maybe you'll have some answers here as we go along. So it turns out that if you are going to sell these high-end cameras for Nikon, Minolta, Canon, if you're going to be allowed to sell them, you have to agree not to sell them below a certain price. There's like a floor price at which the manufacturer says you may not sell this camera below this price. Just it's kind of the way it's the way that they're controlling the market. And so Amazon wants to be able to sell these. But now, all of a sudden, Amazon and every other electronic retailer can't compete on price. That's where Amazon loves to compete on price. They don't really want to be the very lowest seller necessarily, but they want to be very competitive on price. So if you can't lower your price below this threshold, which everyone should be comfortable selling it at, how are you going to compete? How are you going to compete against other online retailers selling these high-level cameras? Any thoughts? Yep. That's exactly what they do. So here's what they do. We'll say, we're going to sell you this camera at the minimum price we're allowed to sell it to you for, and we're going to compete by what we throw in with it. We're going to throw in a tripod. We're going to throw in a flash. We're going to throw in a bunch of memory cards. And so it's a really different competitive landscape because you don't compete on price. And Amazon is wired to go find out information about prices. Finding out information about bundles, that's kind of a custom thing. And so the digital camera division like goes to whatever IT department there is, internal IT department there is for Amazon. We need to be able to get this different kind of data. And what did they say? What did they say? We can do that for you. We can write a program that will get that information. It will cost you $100,000, and it'll take us a year to do it. What did they do instead? They hired an intern to do it. And so this was his job. He started on Wednesday, and it was like, this is all you do here, is like you go and find out what this competitor is bundling with this particular camera, and this camera, and this camera, and this camera, and then you go to the next competitor, and you find out with this camera, and this camera, and this camera. He said by Friday, 3 days of this, he was ready to end it all. I don't know what he meant when he said end it all, but he was pretty frustrated with the internship. And so that weekend, he went home, and he said, we did something like this in Professor Allen's class, and he went to the blog, and he kind of reviewed it, and he said, all right, I'm going to do this. He worked like late into the night on Friday, all day Saturday. He said, I even worked on Sunday. And I said, don't tell me, tell your bishop. And by Monday morning, he had written a tool to do his internship, to be able to now, instead of, go follow the link, copy, paste, follow the link, yep, same, follow the link, yep, same as yesterday. Follow the link, yep, same as yesterday. Literally, follow the link, yep, same as yesterday. Program that would go and do that. Now, it's not the same level of software that would have been written by the internal department. When you're writing software for yourself, if it has an error, not a big deal, right? Go find out, see what the error is in the code, and kind of move along. So it's not as good as they would have done, for $100,000 and taken a year. But what do you think his supervisor thought when he came in Monday morning and said, I've written a program to do that? I did it over the weekend in my spare time. And now, it's like his internship was done. So, I mean, so what did he do? Did he have to keep doing that? No, what did they have him do? What do you think they had him do for the rest of his internship? Like they went around and found other processes that he could apply his skills to, which were he wasn't advanced. Like he had this one class, and it was mostly what we're about to see here today in class. Do you think he got the offer? He got the offer for a full-time position. And I asked him, well, are you going to take it? He said, no, I didn't really like working there that much. But then later I told this story, and I guess someone who knew him said he did end up taking the offer, so I don't know. Anyway. So, okay, but one other word of warning about this. It was, it must have been about 3 or 4 years ago. I had someone who wasn't even one of my former students, but just knew I was the guy on VBA, but he was, he's a student here at BYU. And he had gotten a job working somewhere over in the administration building. And it was, again, some kind of mind-numbing task where it was like, you've got to go and like move files. It's like we've got thousands and thousands of files in this directory structure, and we have to fundamentally change the way that we're storing them. So you've got to go into this directory structure and copy the files from here and put them over here into this other part of the structure. So again, something, and it was thousands and thousands and thousands of files that you had to do. And so they're just going to hire a human to do it. And he said, there's got to be a way to automate this. And I thought to myself, why would I even help this guy? He hasn't even taken my class. But at that time, I was trying to get volunteers to come help us set up for the Colonial Heritage Festival. And I said, okay, if you will come and spend a day setting up, I'll help you with it. So we spent 3 or 4 hours. We got it running. And it took about 3 hours to run, like once we had it going. But he ran it, and it did everything he was supposed to do, in his like internship that was supposed to take most of the summer. And so he went in like the next Monday morning, and he's all, okay, I'm finished. What's next? And what did they say? They said, you're fired. Yeah, they literally did. That's why we hired you. You're done doing it. Your job is over. He's telling me this while he's helping me set up for the Colonial Heritage Festival. I felt kind of bad about that. So anyway, you need to be sensitive about this. Maybe he would have been better, just pushing the button once a day and doing a little bit and then watching Netflix in his office or something. I don't know, but anyway. So, okay. So now that we have the web query in place, what we want to do is we want to record ourselves editing it, telling it to refresh, copying the data that it brings in, and going and put it into the place that we're going to put it. So that's going to be our process. We have a little more setup to do. So we've got here this sheet called sheet 1. I'm going to rename this sheet. I'm just going to call this web query, just so that when I see in my code what it's doing, I'll be able to be a little more oriented. I don't have to think, well, what was on sheet 1? What was on sheet 2? Web query, Query. All right, and then I'm going to make another one here called, I'm just going to call it tickers. T-I-C-K-E-R. If I could type T-I-C-K-E-R-S. Okay, so on my tickers here, let's see. I'm gonna put. I'll just make some data here. I'll zoom in just a bit here. If I can remember how to zoom in. Control zoom. There we go. T-I-C-K-E-R. Why don't we go after the price earnings ratio, the P/E ratio, and the earnings per share. We could go after the current price. We could go after the bid-ask spread. We could go after the volume, but I'm just going to pick these two. And let's just put some tickers in here. So let's put in my very favorite ticker, Southwest Airlines, LUV, Apple, Google, Microsoft, ExxonMobil, American Express, and we could put some more in, but that'll be a few. So whether we have here 6 or 600 or 6,000, but once we get it going, the process is the same, right? We're going to record ourselves, getting the information for one, and then we'll edit the code that says go and make it pull in the information over and over and over. All right, so we've got this set up. I want to make one change to my web query. So let's come back to the web query sheet. And I'm going to want some space above my web query. So I am going to just like insert a row, insert entire row. So I want my web query not to be in A1. So here, starting in A2 is where the results of the web query the results are. And I am going to have A1 blank. So I've got something else in mind for A1, which we're going to see here in just a minute. Okay, we ready? We ready to go ahead and do it? Anyone saying, hold on just a second? Okay. Now, before I start recording a macro, I always want to think of I want to answer two questions in my mind before I start. And the first one is, when the user runs this macro, what cell should be active when they start to run it? And so out of all the cells, we got billions of cells to choose from here. Out of all these cells, like when someone goes to run the macro, and this macro is going to get the information for one ticker, what cell should we be on when the user runs this macro? I'm going to narrow it down. It's on the ticker sheet. Which cell should we be on? Okay, we could be on A1. The problem is A1 is a header information. And so I don't really like A1 that much. What would be another option? A2. Yeah, A2 would be great, or A3. Any one of these that has a ticker in it. Because that's going to be the way that the user tells me which ticker do they want the information about. Select the ticker that you want the information about, run the macro, and it'll bring in the information for that ticker. So the first thing is, where should the user be when they start to run this macro? And wherever that is, that's where you start recording. So I'm gonna be here. I guess I'll go to A2. Now, the second question I want to think about before I start recording is, after this macro is done running, where should the active cell leave off? Because wherever that is, I want to make sure that I move there before I stop recording the macro. So where should it end up? After I get the information here for Southwest Airlines, where should I leave the active cell? A3. Who said that? Brilliant. Why A3? It's ready to go for the next one. So we can run it, and then it's ready to go again, it's ready to go again, it's ready to go again. Excellent. So for this particular example, I think that's a really good option. So I've thought about those two, and I think I'm ready to go. So on my developer tab, I'm going to come and choose record macro. I'm already on the cell I want to be on, so I'm on A2. Developer tab, I'm going to choose record macro, and it's saying, great, what do you want to call it? I'm going to call it stock info, I guess, DOCK info. So stock _ info, no spaces allowed. Shortcut key, it would be tempting to call it Control S. What's the problem if I call it Control S? Yeah, you're not going to save your workbook anymore if you do that. Make sure that you're putting it in this workbook, and I'm just going to say this is going to be get info from finance.youre.com, finance.yahoo.com. Okay. I'm going to be very careful about what I do. Now, the truth is, if I do something that I didn't mean to do, that's probably okay, because I'll be able to go and look at the code and kind of delete the stuff that it recorded that I didn't really want. But it's always cleaner if I'm not recording extraneous stuff. So I'm going to start off by copying that ticker. So just Control C, or however you want to get that copied. Oh, and you know what I'm going to do? You guys go ahead and stay there. I think we did this last time. I wonder if I can get there. Do I have my... Oh, I think I opened that on the Mac. Let me go ahead and open up the Visual Basic Editor here. And modules, it's created module 1. Okay, so here we'll be able to see the things that it's recording. So it's making the subprocedure called stock info and selection.copy. When I pressed Control C, it said, great, you want to, with the selection object, we're going to execute the copy method, the copy method. So remember, we've got objects, methods, and properties. These are the kind of the main ideas that we've thought about so far in the language. So with a selection object, it's saying, hey, with this thing, whatever is selected, we're going to tell it to do something it knows how to do. We're going to tell it, so we're going to say, hey, selected object or selected range, copy, kind of do whatever copy is. And that's built into that range object to be able to do a copy. Now, I'm going to go ahead and click on the web query sheet, and you're going to watch it kind of do something similar. So it's saying, hey, we're identifying an object here. And it's a little bit strange the way we do it here, but we say, listen, we have a collection of sheets. We'll talk specifically about collections here pretty soon. But out of all the sheets in this workbook, there's one called web query. That's the thing I'm talking about. That's the object. And we are calling its select method. We're telling the object to select itself, to make itself the active sheet. Oh, and now I'm in trouble because I'm already on A1, and I really want to tell it to go to A1. So I'm going to click off of A1, and it's selected E3. But watch what happens now if I click back on A1. The macro recorder is smart enough to know that, listen, it doesn't do any good to go select something and not do anything with it. So you can kind of select whatever you want, and it's going to like say, listen, pick which one you want to select, and we're just going to select one of these. And ultimately, I'm going to come back here to A1, and it's going to say, great, you want to select A1. But I definitely need to be able to have that action actually select A1 because I need to record that line that says, make sure, now that we're on the web query sheet, make sure that we are on that cell that I'm after. And at this point, I am ready to paste. And I am going to paste by pressing enter. Oop. Or you can press Control V or not. That would do it as well. If you pressed Control V or did another way of pasting, then you would have got this paste statement, but you would not have gotten this one that takes you out of cut copy mode. So Excel has several different modes you can go into, and when it's in one of these different modes, some of your normal keystrokes behave differently. For example, normally enter, when you hit enter, if you're just on a cell, it moves you down to the next cell. But if you're in cut copy mode and you press enter, it pastes. And so, and it takes you out of cut copy mode when you paste with an enter. And so that's why it recorded that. Ultimately, you're going to get a cut copy mode one way or another, and that will happen. But that's what that is. This one's kind of a weird one because you didn't really do that on purpose, but because you're done, you're no longer in cut copy mode, it just recorded that activity. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to edit my web query. So I'm going to try to say I want to change what URL this is going to. Now, Mac, if you're on the Mac today, you won't be able to edit. Like I'm going to come here and select A2, somewhere that has the results of the web query on it. And I'm going to right click that. And I've got this thing, edit query. Mac users, you have an edit query there too, but it won't do anything when you click on it, sadly. But over here on the PC side, if we click on that, it will bring back up our editor. Now, you may remember that last time we recorded a macro, I told you that everything you're doing is being recorded by the Mac by Excel. And that's not entirely true. Whenever you get to a dialog box like this, the macro recorder says, oh, a dialog box. I can tell you need a little personal time here. I'll avert my eyes. And it doesn't actually pay attention to what you do in that dialog box until you click OK, or in this case, import. Then once you click on import, it says, okay, I'm going to look at how you configured this, and we're going to record. That's how you configured it. And so even if I was to record myself plugging in here a URL that somehow kept track of which ticker I was on, it would just have the static URL that is recorded here. And we've got the URL that I'm after for this one is right over here. So come back over to your VBA, our VBA course, and then the link for the VBA code. Here we've got the link to finance.yahoo.com. In fact, before I paste that in, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of go to that page. So here's the page that we're after at finance.yahoo.com. We're interested in the price earnings ratio and the earnings per share. That's what we're after for Southwest Airlines. But instead of us doing it here, and then of course having a human copy and paste it, we're going to give that same URL to our web query wizard. And so I'm just going to change the address with that new address. I'll click on go, and that should load that page. And it's going to have a few errors because this is a pretty complex page with a lot of active content on it. So I'm going to click no as many times as it takes for those to stop showing up. Just 2? I'm surprised. And then I'll click import. Let me go ahead and bring my code back up here. And I'll click import, and you'll see that it's going to say, okay, I now see how this thing is configured. Oh, it's going to, and it should record in here. Then everything. So we only changed one thing. We changed the URL that it was looking at, but it's saying, listen, we're going to keep track of what kind of selection type it is. Are we going to bring it in as formatted? Are we going to disable redirections, which I've never played with? But all of that is configurable inside that wizard. And then the last one down here is saying, hey, now after we change all of these properties, we're going to run the refresh method. So we've changed the connection up here to look at finance.yahoo.com, and then we're telling it to refresh. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to stop recording here so that we can get our Mac friends up to speed with us at this point. So let's go ahead and stop recording. And now, in fact, we'll be with you here in just a moment, Mac folks. But we're going to have you copy that block of code in kind of to this same place. And I am going to come back here. I'm going to come back here to tickers. You don't need to do this with me, but I'm going to come back and play this macro. So Control-Shift-F should play this. And we're going to see something that's a little bit troubling. I'm trying to run this macro that I just recorded, and it tells me I have an invalid procedure call or argument. Let me hit debug, and we'll see where that happens. In the year 2013, they made some change to the web query, the way that the web query was recorded, to where it started recording this line, which it never recorded before. I don't know what it's trying to accomplish, but it's just not valid code. And so you're gonna have to delete this one. This is what's happened to us today is a little bit unfortunate, and it's very rare. In fact, this is the only recording I've ever had happen where it was like it recorded something that's like not valid code. And so you're gonna have to delete that line, but let's just kind of take a look at kind of what these are saying. So it's saying, listen, with the query table that's a part of this, with the query table that's a part of the selection, we're going to change several properties and run some methods. So this is the first time we've seen this structure with, end with. And between this structure with, end with, it says, listen, if anything just starts with a dot, just like pretend that whatever is on the with part is before that. So this would be exactly the same. I plug that in there. It's saying, listen, with the, take the selection, find the web query that's behind, or the query table that's behind that selection, and change its connection property. We're giving that property a new value. So we definitely want this one because it is the one that's giving us the URL that we're after, even though it's a hard-coded URL. We're going to come back and modify that in just a minute. We don't need this one. It's bad code anyway. I'm going to go ahead and click stop because I don't really want to be in break mode with this yellow line that's trying to execute. I'm going to click the stop button. And all the rest of these things, it's recording the way it already is. We didn't change any of these. And so just to simplify our code, I'm going to get rid of this. It would not hurt to leave these just the way we are because it's saying, hey, set this property to this. We're bringing in the whole page. But that's the way it's already configured, right? Because it didn't keep track of what I changed in that dialog box. When I was done, it just said, here's how this dialog box is configured. Here's all the information. And when you're first starting at this, you'd probably look at some of these things and go, I have no idea what that's talking about. I'm just going to leave it untouched. That would be okay. But since you are under my expert tutelage today, you'll be a little braver. And so I'm going to delete all those things down, but not the very last one, because the last one here is the method that's telling it to refresh. And this part right here, it almost looks like we're assigning a property because you see that equal sign here, like we do on these other properties up here. But this is a colon equals. And what this is saying is that, listen, I'm sending some information into this method to tell this method how to behave. So we can have this query either run as a background query or not as a background query. If it runs as a background query, then we say, hey, refresh that query, and my VBA code keeps running. It doesn't wait until it's done refreshing. It might take 3 or 4 seconds for it to run, and whenever it comes in, that's great, but we've got other things to do. But in this case, we're saying, I don't know, we got to pause. We got to stop our VBA code until that page is loaded, because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to copy stuff that came in. So it definitely needs to be a background query. It needs to not be a background query. And so we're saying, do this as a refresh, but don't refresh in the background. In other words, pause here until this page has loaded, until the page has refreshed. So if you're one of my Mac users, you will have, this would have shown up in your immediate window. And so you just want to copy that code and bring it in. It might say Apple instead of Southwest Airlines. That's okay. Either one is fine. Any questions to this point? So, can you see the real problem with my code so far? There's like a disconnect between what I'm trying to do and what the code is currently doing. And what is that disconnect? Don't be shy, my children. Go ahead. Oh, absolutely. Okay, so that's a good point. Because and if we look here, we're going to see, yeah, we're getting all kinds of information here. It's like loading up this whole page. If I scroll down here to the early 100s, I should be able to see my price earnings ratio and my earnings per share. That's all I'm after. And so, yeah, like my next step is going to be to copy these two values out and bring them back to my tickers page and plug them in here. So definitely, we definitely have to do that. But there's another disconnect even that's problematic before we get to that point. Oh, am I? Oh, thanks. I thought I stopped recording. Let's go ahead and stop recording. Thank you for pointing that out. Stop recording. We're going to start recording again here in just a second, but let me delete all of this. Thank you. Here's the problem that I'm after right there, right? Because that's just a collection of characters. And when we see this, when we see these double quotes here and characters inside, what we're saying to the VBA interpreter is we're saying, listen, don't try to understand that. Don't try to figure out what that means. That's not for you. Just keep track of those characters. It's not like it's trying to identify an object or a variable or trying to run a method. It's just saying, here's some characters. And LUV, the ticker that I'm after, is hard-coded into that string. So no matter which ticker I start on, no matter which ticker I put into cell A1 on this sheet, it's always going to bring Southwest Airlines. You know, look at that line, and what's the computer doing? What's it looking for? It's looking for love, which is just a little bit sad. I mean, it's a machine here, probably wants to have a little more of a human experience, but no, we're not going to let it do that. So here's what we're going to do. I am going to, sadly, I'm going to delete the love. And I want to tell it to append onto the end of this whatever value I have in cell A1. That's the reason that when I was on my ticker sheet, I did copy, I came to the web query, and I pasted my ticker into A1 so I would have easy access to it, so I would know exactly where that ticker is when I got to this point of the process. Now, if I was trying to concatenate two values in an Excel formula, what symbol would I use? There's a couple approaches I could do. How would I do that? I'm making an Excel formula, and I want to just take two values and glue them together. The ampersand. I would just use ampersand and stick them together. It's the same in VBA. So at the end of that string, after the quotes, I'm going to put an ampersand. And now I've got to tell it to get the value off of cell A1. Well, how do I refer to a particular range? Good news, they recorded that for me right here. That's identifying that particular object. I'm going to copy that. Put it after the ampersand. That gets me to the object. Now, which property do I want? Yeah, I don't want the formula. I don't want the address. I don't want the background color of that cell. I want the value. So dot value. So now when this line runs, it's going to say, all right, we are trying to change the connection property of the query table behind whatever we have selected. Fortunately, we just selected query or cell A2, and that's where that web query is. What are we going to put into it? Well, we're going to put in these characters URL and then the URL. By the way, the URL is what tells the web query or the query object that this is a web query. We're going to put in every one of these characters exactly the same every time. It's what we refer to as a string literal. It is literally that set of characters. But now, something that's going to be different every time. And what will this evaluate to right now? Like if I was to just kind of run this and come to my immediate window and say debug.print, that value, what is that going to print? Yeah, whatever is in A1 at the time. The next time I run this, it's going to have Google in it, and it's going to print Google instead. And so you can see how, but what we've done here is going to make it so it puts a different URL into that web query each time, so that when I refresh it, it will pull the information for the ticker that's a part of the URL that's now on that query. Show me how comfortable you are with what we just talked about here on 0 to 5. 5, 5, 5, 3, 3. If you're 3 or more, you should be. I think you're okay. If you're a 0 at this point, we need to spend some time together, personal time in my office. Come and we'll get you up to speed. Okay. So I think I'm ready just to kind of run this. Let me just take a look and make sure that I can see this change. So I'm looking at the EPS here as 0.94, earnings per share 0.94. I think I'm ready to kind of run this and see what happens. So I'm going to come back here to tickers, and I'm going to choose Google, and I'm going to press Control-Shift-S. I'm curious to see if my EPS is going to be different than 0.94. Requesting the web page. It's got the web page. Come down here to, I can see that it says Goog in it now. That's a good sign. Come down here to around 100, look for EPS. And it's now, the earnings per share is now in January. So what that means is that it took a number that it actually looked at and formatted as a date. Oh, curse you, Excel. I wonder if that's a setting that I can change. But right now, we're not going to deal with that. We're going to pretend that came in just the way I wanted it. Or if I wish I would have looked at price earnings ratio instead. Okay. Questions? Okay, so at this point, I think I'm ready to start recording again. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to record myself making a new macro, and then after I'm done with the part that's going to do the copy and paste, I'm going to just merge these all into the same macro. This is going to be pretty straightforward. I would like to put myself back where I left off. I think the last thing I had selected was A2, just so that this process will be the same. Now, next thing I have to do is I've got to figure out how to find the data that I'm after. Depending on how simple or complex the page is, it may come into the same cell every time, in which case I could just say, hey, copy whatever is in that cell. But let's take a look over here at price earnings ratio. And my price earnings ratio is in B11. Raise your hand if your price earnings ratio is in B11. I'm the only one with price earnings ratio in B11. You're in B11 too. You're in B11. You're in B11. Now, if you're in some other row besides, or no, it's not B11. What is it? B111. If you're on some row other than row 111, raise your hand. Ah, so you guys are all somewhere. You're probably close though, aren't you? 110, 108. Yes, you're close in there. So what's happened is that if we go back and look at the page that this came from, is as these different ads load in here, as we bring in that whole page, it kind of changes where all that data goes. And so this page is complex enough that we're not going to be able to just say, go right there to B111 and pull the information. So thoughts about how we might do it. How are we going to figure out how to get to the right sheet? Go ahead, or the right cell. Ah. Yeah, because that's a really good point. You're saying, listen, just find PE ratio trailing 12 months, and then just go one cell to the right of that. Excellent. because you know what? If this gets moved down, they're going to get moved down together. I like it. So what we're going to do is we're going to record ourselves doing a find for that. In fact, I may just come in here and just kind of copy out. This will work better if I copy out of the formula bar. I'm just going to copy that so I can search exactly for that. I'm copying that text. And I'm going to record myself searching for that and then moving one over to the right. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Now, every time before when I've selected a cell, it has recorded myself going directly to that cell. It says, you know, go to A1, refer to A1. But now I want to do something that's like a relative reference. You're familiar with absolute and relative references in your formula writing days. There's a similar notion in recording a macro. The default is to record an absolute reference. You go to that cell and it goes, go to A1. But now I'm going to tell it, I want to use relative references. And it's actually a button right up here in my Visual Basic toolbar, in my Visual Basic tab. So right below record macro is use relative references. And right now it's like it's off, but if I click on it, you'll see it kind of sticks on. So now when I record myself selecting a cell, it will record it as a relative move from the active cell. And by the way, you can turn this on and off while you're recording. So if you're saying, no, I need to record this absolute, you can change it. And then something else as I'm going along, record this as relative, you can turn that on and off. But I think we're going to want it on for the rest of our example here. Okay, so I'm ready to start recording again, but first let me get back up to A2 because that's where I left off in this process. And give myself, and it should now build another sub procedure here as I start to record this new macro. So back onto my developer tab, I'm going to come to the macros. What should I call this one? Macro 2 is a great name. And the reason it's such a great name is that I'm going to get rid of the name of this macro. I'm just going to merge these two together. So I'm going to get rid of that. That's fine. I don't need a shortcut key for it. Put it in this workbook. That sounds great. So I'm going to search with Control F or Command F. And I'm going to paste in that PE ratio TTM. If you didn't have it on your clipboard, you can type it in. Make sure you've got the spacing right, the capitalization right. In fact, I'm also going to come in here to options. And I'm going to say I want to match case and I want to match the entire cell contents. The reason is if I've got some advertisement that's happening up, somewhere up higher in my page that's talking about the PE ratio, your PE ratio trailing 12 months too low, buy our product and we'll improve it. I don't want to accidentally find that somewhere else. So I want to restrict it down. It's got to match the case exactly, and it's got to be the full contents of the cell. That's the one I'm looking for. And now I'll go ahead and click Find. Find Next. And so there it is, found it, and it's recorded now the line that does this. So kind of similarly, when we were doing that web query, that dialog box had a lot of information in it. Same thing here. And so we'll parse that out here in just a moment. I'm going to close this. And now, because I have use relative references selected, when I click on the next cell to the right, it's not going to say record, go to B111. It's going to say offset from the active cell, offset 0 rows and 1 column. That range A1 means something a little bit confusing. It's not actually talking about A1. We'll talk about what that actually means, but it really is just saying select that cell, it's 1 to the right. I'm ready to copy that. When I click back on my tickers sheet, you'll see it selecting the ticker sheet. Now I'm still on relative references, which is what I want, because as I click one cell to the right, I want to stay on that line that I had selected, and it's selecting one cell to the right, and I'm ready to paste. I'll paste that in. That looks great. I'm going to come back to my web query sheet. Now I'm thinking I'm probably safe, okay, and I don't have to search for EPS TTM. I don't think an advertisement's going to go between those two. So I think selecting one down is going to say, great, just select the one down from there. We'll copy that one, go back to tickers, click one to the right again, paste that in, and I'm done, right? right? No, what do I have to do? Yeah, I got to end off where I want the active cell to end off after the process. So now we'll come down to still on relative references, the next row down, back onto the ticker. And now I'm ready to stop recording. Whew. I think we're actually in pretty good shape. I think I can, oh, we got to do one more thing. We got to merge these two together. So listen, like up here, my stock info macro, it's coming along, it's doing all of this, it's doing all this great, and it gets to end a sub, which says we're done. And then the very next part here says, hey, start a new one. You know what? I don't want to end one, I don't want to start one. So I'm just going to delete the end and the start of the next one. And that'll just join those into the same sub procedure. Sub, end sub, we're ready to go. Yes. If I so good question. What you said was well, couldn't we have just kind of kept recording right in that same macro that we were in? Why did we have to create a new macro? Is that the question? And the answer is, well, back in my day when VBA first started, there was an option called record at mark. In other words, you could just, wherever you had your insertion point, that's where it would start recording the lines. And they got rid of that. I don't know why they got rid of it. My guess is it confused my mother, or people like my mother who didn't quite know what to do with it. And so that option is just gone. At least if it's not gone, it's somewhere I can't find it anymore. And so when you record, you're always making a new macro. So yeah, this process of saying, hey, we're going to merge those two together is what we live with. All right, but now, question here, yeah.
So, I think your screen micro debugging on, you have like the greens, like the value.
Oh, here.
High.
Oh, here.
Oh, micro debugger.
These here.
That play button is the pause button.
Yeah.
Is that just pausing to the play, pausing code and playing the macro?
Ah, very good.
Just playing the macro?
The pause is just, this is just for playing. It doesn't, I've never tried to use that as a pause while I was recording. I would be shocked if that would pause the recording. Yeah, test it out and let us know. Okay, but I think the rest of this is ready to go. So I think I can come to Microsoft, press Control-Shift-S, and it should bring in the information for Microsoft. I wonder if that's like formatted. The fact that it brought two of those in as dates is just a little bit troubling to me. Makes me wonder if I could, like that cell is like now like a date range. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of edit this whole column. Well, I'm going to edit this area as text. What would happen if I did that? Control-1, text, okay. Oops, I'm lost. We'll do American Express, Control-Shift-S. Come back to me, my child. Oh, so that brought it in. So I formatted that as text. Now it's coming in as text as well. Let me just see if I can kind of format this whole range as number instead of general. Trying to convince that web query to bring that information in the way that I'm after it. Pull these out again, and I'm going to pull in. Was it Southwest was the one that did it first? Control-Shift-S. Okay, that's doing it better now. So what did I do? So I think this is the first time it's ever happened that it kind of pulled one that identified as a date accidentally the first time. So I just kind of highlighted this whole range and formatted it as number, I think. Anyway, that took care of that problem. All right, now, if I only had six tickers to deal with, I would press Control-Shift-S 6 times. Maybe even if I had to do this, every day I might do that. But what's the problem if I have 600 of them? My pinky is going to get tired from pressing Control-Shift-S. Plus, I'd like to be able to say, listen, go get all of these, and I'm going to go get a ham sandwich. And by the way, when you're done, send me a text message so I can know the data is here. Could I make Excel send me a text message? Oh, yeah. Am I going to show you how to make Excel send you a text message? Not today. But I will before the end of the semester. It's a little more involved than we can do today. And that's like telling you to do something over and over again is not something that I'm going to record myself doing. You got to write this in by hand. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to make ourselves another sub-procedure. So I've got this sub-procedure up here called stock info. I'm going to come right above it. And I could go above or below. It wouldn't matter. Like the order that it's in doesn't matter. I'm just going to type in a new sub-procedure. Sub. I'll call it get all stock info. I guess I'm not all that creative. Get all stock info. And what I want this to do is I want it to get the stock info. And so this seems a little bit strange, but I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to put the name of the other macro. If I put the name of that, when I make a macro, it becomes a new statement that I can execute. And so these two sub-procedures, get all stock info and get stock info, now do exactly the same thing, because the one just invokes the functionality of the other. But I want it to invoke the functionality of the other over and over again. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come right above it, and we're going to create what in programming lingo is called a loop. I'm going to say do. And there's like 3 fundamentally different kinds of loops in VBA. This is the simplest one. It's called the do loop. The keyword do says, this is the beginning of the loop. And it says, somewhere later in the code, we're going to tell you, Mr. Interpreter, to go back to the beginning of the loop. And this is just a mark that says, this is the beginning. And the keyword that says, go back to the beginning is loop. It's called the do loop. And so now what's going to happen is when I run this, it is going to say, great, beginning of the loop, run stock info. It'll come down here and it'll go through all these. Bing, 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 bing. It'll do all this whole thing. When it's done, it'll come right back to where it left off. And we'll get to loop. And loop says, go back to the do. And then it'll get to stock info. And it'll go, oh, stock info. Bing, 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 bing. Do all these. Come back here, go to loop. How long is this going to run? Well, forever is a really long time. It will not run forever. It will run until there's a power failure, until there's a network fault. It will run until a nuclear holocaust. That would end it. Second coming would probably end it as well. But we haven't given it any way to get out on its own. The truth is, this would run, because it's moving down a row each time, eventually what's going to happen? It's going to get 1.04 million executions later. It'll be at the very end of the worksheet, and we're going to tell it to go past the end of the workbook, and it would say, I can't do it, and I'll stop. How long would it take? It takes like, a few seconds each time. I just wish Alexa were here so I could ask her how many hours is 1.04 million seconds. Anyone looking that up yet? Anyway, whatever that time is, that's how long it would take. I don't want to wait that long. Fortunately, we can put a clause that allows us to exit out of this. And I'm going to put it up here at the top. How long is it? It would take 12 days. That's if it gets 1 per second. I don't think it's going to get 1 per second. So I'm going to do, and here I can tell it, I want to do this until some other condition becomes true. And so I'm going to do until my active cell, let's see, are we talking about the active cell? Do we say active cell anywhere in this? Yeah, we refer to active cell. So active cell, just object that refers to whatever the active cell is. Do until the active cell's value, and maybe I'm going to put, till the active cell's value equals something. So at the end of my list, I put here like XXX or something. I could do until the active cell's value is equal to XXX. Actually, that kind of sounds like a publicly traded pornography company. I probably shouldn't do that. Let's put here S-T-O-P. S-T-O-P. Okay. So because every time we run this, it moves down, it's going to be on one of these cells each time it starts. I'm going to do this until the active cell is equal to stop. Now, the only problem with this is that stop may be, it could be a ticker. For all I know, that's a valid ticker. So instead of looking until it says stop, I could just look until it says STO or st or nothing. It's a really weird way to say nothing. Quote, quote. But that is what an empty cell is. It's a string with no characters in. And then I'll get rid of stop here at the bottom. So now I should be able to press Control-Shift-S. Oh no, Control-Shift-S will run stock info. We don't have any hotkey on this one. So we'll do one more thing real quick and then we'll be done. And that is I'm going to come to my developer tab and I'm going to choose this little toolbox right here. So it's this controls group. It says insert, little toolbox. And I'm going to choose that first little tool. It's just a little button. So that first tool there. And I'm just going to draw that right here on the sheet. I'm going to draw a button right here. So say you probably want to run a macro. Yep, I want to run get all stock info. And then I can change what's on the face of that button. I'll just call it get data. I'll click off of it so it knows I'm done editing the button. And now when I click that, I'm going to just do 3 of these. It will, it's going to run until my active cell is blank, and it's already blank. So I'm doing one more thing here, and that is I want to select A2. Come back. Range A2.select. Where did you go? So before I go into the loop, I'm going to tell it go to the beginning. So go to A2 and then call stock info until we run out of data. And so now it's getting for Southwest Airlines, then it's getting for Google, then it's getting for Apple. And when it's done, it should show all the data there, right there. Nothing up my sleeve there. And it looks like we got back to our dates instead. So we've got something to work on the dates here. But the point here is that we've now recorded ourselves doing something, took a little bit of editing, and then we made it into a loop to go over and over again. And that is a really common process that you can do in VBA. Record, edit, loop. Thanks for coming today. Class dismissed. Oh, you're too kind. You're too kind. Thank you. What a nice crowd.